and welcome to our next episode of Virginia True Wildlife Crime. Thanks for joining us today, and thanks for watching our first 2 episodes. We had close to 250,000 views on our first 2 episodes. You guys have shown us and told us that this content is valuable, so we have plenty of stories to tell, and we're going to keep coming back. So today, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. The first 2 episodes were about specific cases. Today, we're going to be talking about a team, our elite canine team here at DWR. So joining us today is Sergeant Richard Howald, and he's going to be talking to us about how he selects and trains and leads this elite group of law enforcement officers. Thanks for being here today.
It's good to be here with you.
So tell us a little bit about yourself first. How long have you been working with canines, training canines? Give us a little background.
All right, so I've been with the agency, I'm coming up on 20 years. And the canine program itself, we started putting together in 2010. We went to Indiana in 2011 to train with their DNR there. Working with dogs, it started before that. You know, not everybody's in law enforcement their entire life. So the dogs I was around was working dogs. Most of the dogs that I grew up around was for either with cattle or hogs. So blue heelers, Australian shepherds, Australian cattle dogs, things like that to work animals, or around hunting dogs, either bird dogs for quail or squirrel dogs or a coon dog. So each growing up and seeing those and seeing each breed have a specific job, that's what I was used to.
So here at DWR, you said we started in 2010, but we were training somewhere else.
Yes, we went to Indiana and trained with their handlers there. They'd had a program for quite a while. And so we took 3 dogs to them in 2011.
So now, how many dogs do we have now? And then we're also training in-house.
Yes.
You're leading that effort.
Right now we're up to 9 dogs and 9 handlers. And when we transitioned, so when we went there in 2011, we trained 3 dogs, we came back, and we're very successful with the first 3 dogs of locating evidence, locating wildlife, locating, tracking people on suspects. And so the department decided they wanted to add more dogs. So we did an in-house school, but we had the instructors from Indiana come out and kind of coach us through adding those 2 dogs. And then the years after that, if we weren't running a school for just adding 1 dog or 2 dogs, then we go to Indiana and train with them. Then when we started adding more dogs, if I'm running a school that has 4 or 5 handlers in it, then we did a school in-house. And then we also trained 6 dogs for West Virginia, starting their program.
So you've gotten to the point now that we're kind of becoming a hub for other folks too that are looking to train. So you said West Virginia. Is anybody else or shown interest to come and train with us?
Yeah, other states have reached out, and it's interesting is when you're trying to add 1 or 2 dogs, trying to find a school that's open, because not each state is going to run a school, add dogs every year. So some states have kind of taken, especially Indiana, have taken on that role to where they might add 1 dog for themselves, but then train up to 7 or 8 dogs for other states. So when I've been out there, we've trained with Washington, Oregon, Utah, Idaho, a lot of dogs from Kansas. We've trained with Missouri. I mean, we've trained with dogs from all over the United States.
That's a great collaboration too, because you can learn from each other while you're there.
Yeah, that's right. Each state uses the dogs a little bit different, even though they're wildlife dogs, which is also different from general law enforcement. So you get to train with people that have made cases, that understand what you do and how you're going to work and how you're going to deploy that dog in the environment that we work in.
So you just mentioned that we train wildlife dogs a little bit different than what most people might encounter as a law enforcement dog with their sheriff's office or local PD. We're a bit different. Can you tell us a little bit about the difference between our canines and a typical law enforcement canine?
Right. Usually the typical, a lot of people think of is just starting with the breed. A lot of people are thinking of a shepherd, and they're using that shepherd for apprehension, which we don't do apprehension, or it's a dual purpose dog, so it goes apprehension, drugs, and tracking. And so with us, we're using a lab or a sporting breed. We want the dog that breed already wants to hunt. It already wants to work independently of you. And so that's why we select that breed. So that's a big difference we see in the breeds. And then a lot of people think of a bloodhound in tracking. And we use the lab or GSPs or another sporting breed for the tracking also. So that's where we spend our time, is the article searches for evidence and tracking suspects. So it's a little bit different in the breed when you start thinking about a breed type of the typical patrol dog. Now with a lot of agencies, they are using single-purpose dogs, which would be explosive dogs or drug dogs, and they'll transition between a shepherd, a Malinois, or a lab, or any other breed that they can use as a single purpose.
Now, if I can just go back real quick, you said GSP, German Shorthair Pointer?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so we've used those before. Again, we focus on the sporting breeds. When you're doing that breed selection is really important. You know, if you use a Malinois or a shepherd, they already want to herd, they want to protect. They're already nip at things, so for apprehension, it's not hard to get that dog to do that. So if you take a lab, that lab already wants to hunt, retrieve things, and that's what we want. We want that dog to go out and hunt, use its nose differently than what a shepherd would. So that's why breed selection for us is really important. So you'll see different breeds than general law enforcement.
Now tell me a little bit about the training. How long is it? What does it involve? And I always think you're training the dog, but you're not just training the dog, you're training the handler too.
That's correct. So the training is a 400-hour course. So once we've selected a dog and we've selected handlers, we'll start pairing the dog and handlers up. When they come to the training, they're away from their home usually for 2 weeks, and then they'll go home for 2 weeks or a week, depending on weather and things, and then they'll come back for 2 weeks, and they go home for a week or two, and then they're back for 2 weeks. But during that period, it's the handler and the dog. We usually stay at one of the state parks, work with DCR. So they're very focused on that dog. I need them to learn everything about their dog. Like you were saying, as I train the dog, I show the handler, I teach them about pack behavior, dog behavior, training techniques, how the dog's nose works, how the dog's nose is affected by temperature, terrain, humidity, and time. And so that's the handler has to learn all that. Then they start working and training their dog. So, but once we get that dog doing what we want, then I really focus on the handler, because I need them to make good decisions for the dog. Their timing on correction or praise has to be within a second to a second and a half of the behavior we want or don't want. So they've got to learn all that in the school. And then also what I really focus on is the handler learning how to deploy that dog. Ask the right questions, set the dog up for success by reading the temperature, like I said, what happened from the time the event happened until the time I got on scene, what has taken place, what weather events has changed, how many people have been on scene, what contamination or distractions for the dog, the safety of the dog. So there's a lot on the handler for the dog to be successful.
It really sounds like a true bond between the handler and the dog. So it's more than just training the dog, it's that bond that has to be there.
Yeah, they really start working as a team. But you see them when they first come to school, they're pretty overwhelmed, and then they start getting into rhythm with their dog. And some of the handlers try to compete with different dogs, and they want their dog to be this dog or want it to be like that dog. But that's not how it is. You take what your dog gives you naturally, and then we just take that behavior and just shape it. All we're doing is shaping the behaviors that the dog naturally gives us. With the handler themselves, it is a lot of stress, and things are happening very, very quick. I mean, it's very quick with the dog to keep track of them. But it's a lot of fun. It's very rewarding to watch them progress. We have the handlers wear GoPros, and we videotape those dogs as much as we can, because the dog shows a different behavior with different odors. It might come into one odor and lift a paw. It might come to an odor and close its mouth and sniff harder. It might tuck its ears. Its tail might go tight. So once you start learning all the behaviors of your dog, you can read your dog very quickly to see if it's in odor or out of odor. And that's called a negative. So the dog is either showing you it's in something, or it's throwing a negative showing it's out of odor. That's
a really interesting idea. It kind of reminds me, if you've ever played a sport or something, you're watching game tape, you're watching tape of whoever you're getting ready to play to kind of know their tells and see what they're doing. So you're almost making that same kind of effort after the fact, watching your dog to make sure you know exactly how they act, so you can react and train that and work with that. That's a really awesome idea.
It's really interesting, because your decision making is always based off of, if someone tells you someone walked here, then my dog should show odor. So if my dog doesn't show odor and they're saying that, then why is my dog not showing odor? And then you can go back. So a lot of times when we go on calls, we prove something did happen or didn't happen very quickly with the dog. because people will lie to you. People will try to change scenes up. People will try to hide something that they did. And so the dog will determine that very quickly. So I listen to what they say during an interview. I pay attention to what people say, but then I watch my dog. My dog is not going to lie to me. My dog's not going to try to trick me. My dog, it doesn't, if it didn't happen and the dog shows me it didn't happen, it doesn't get paid any less. Does that make sense? It doesn't try to influence, it doesn't listen to the interview and try to make it fit what someone told me. So the dog gets to the truth of it pretty quick.
So go through for me the different types of searches that our dogs are trained for. I know when we talked earlier, we talked about tracking, we talked about article searches. Explain the difference in those kind of two things and how the dog might react.
So in tracking, that's one of the first things that we train. It's a very, very hard skill to learn because the handler is connected to the dog by lead. And so by pressure and feet movement, you can influence that dog of how it goes towards odor. So the dog is trained to follow a track line, in which a track line, a lot of people, you know, you ask that question and they'll say, well, it's following the crushed vegetation or it's following their footsteps. What it's doing is it's following your rafts or skin cells that fall off your body. Okay. And then a total scent picture would be the crushed vegetation or exposed dirt. So when you step on the ground and you break grass, then that's releasing gases. When you step on the earth's crust and it breaks, that's releasing gases. And then the skin cells are there. So that is a total scent picture. And what we train our dogs to do is to go onto a track line and stay on that person. So each human has a distinct odor when their skin cell falls off and the bacteria is eating it. And that's what the dog is actually tracking, is that combination.
That's amazing.
So that's what we focus on a lot of, working the dogs to locate a track and then stay on that track. And then they're starting tracks from scent articles or off of a vehicle. And then which is scent discrimination. And then there's scent elimination, which you do all these different combinations with your dog. And it's all different training, different levels of that. And then for articles, that's finding things in a wooded environment that either has human odor or gunpowder or oils on them. Because we train on firearms, but when I put a firearm on there, I cannot tell you exactly what odor the dog is imprinting on when it finds a gun in a field. Is it the human odor where someone touched it? Is it the powder because it was shot? Is it oils because the gun was cleaned? That's really hard to narrow down. So we focus on the outdoor environment.
That's just amazing. So the difference between having a canine on a scene and just having an officer on the scene, exponentially more efficient in finding either people or evidence. Tell me a little bit about how that affects how quickly you can turn something around.
So with the dog, as I was saying earlier, is the dog is going to tell you what happened or not. So I've been on scenes where someone said something happened, someone's trespassing or someone shot there. Well, when I deploy my dog, and my dog is trained to find human odor or any kind of gunpowder or casings or waddings or any of those things, and the dog goes through and shows no behavior change at all, then I'm going to immediately put that dog back in the truck and I'm going to go re-interview because someone's not telling me the truth. Now, I could go out there and spend hours looking around and possibly think that I missed something or didn't see anything. The dog shows it very, very quick. So I can get past that and get to the right answer quicker. You know, I've been on cases where they looked for shell casings for up to 4 days. And when I got there, I was on scene for 4 minutes. Literally 4 minutes to find a casing where wildlife was killed illegally. I've driven 2 hours to work 8 minutes to find 3 shell casings on shootings. It's time saved. It's man hours saved, really, what it is. Or just like in tracking, we'll get a call for someone trespassing or a vehicle parked where it's not, or a missing person. And an officer either has to sit by that vehicle and watch it, they do surveillance on it and wait for someone to come out, or I can just show up and run a track off the vehicle. So it's much quicker. It is much quicker.
Canines and their handlers both valuable assets to the Commonwealth. Just yes. Really spectacular. I know we're going to talk about some cases today, but before we get into that, we've talked about training. We've talked about how amazing these animals are, what a great asset they are to not just DWR, but the entire state. Tell me that obviously folks that have a pet at home know that it's not inexpensive to have a pet. It's definitely not inexpensive to have a working dog. Tell me a little bit about care and maintenance of these animals to make sure they're in tip-top shape? Food, vet care, about how much does that cost?
Yeah, so for each year, it's in between $1,200 to $1,500. Is what we look for the basic care of food, vet care, and checkups. With these dogs, we want to give them the best food we possibly can. So we've talked to Virginia Tech. They've helped us put together how much protein the dog should be getting. We've looked at weights of dogs. When we're looking at one of our working dogs, I consider that dog an athlete. When it's working, it's sniffing 4 to 5 times a second. And so I need it to be at the right weight to where it can work the max amount of time without being too heavy or running out of energy. So there's a balance there. So we work with our vets. We make sure, everybody in Virginia knows there's tick-borne diseases. We got to keep all the vaccines up for that and run tick panels a couple times a year. And then it's just the upkeep of the dog. We really want to make sure our dogs are healthy.
So from what I understand, we've partnered with the Ward Burton Foundation to help make strides in that. Tell me a little bit about that if you can. And I know we'll have some more information up on our website, dwr.virginia.gov/canine. We'll put that link in the description and it should be up on the screen. So in case you want to learn more about our canine teams out there in the field, you can click on that, as well as there are some opportunities if you're feeling generous to help support those canines. With all of this funding, they're obviously a huge value to the Commonwealth. And we're gonna after we're wrapped up today, we're gonna talk back with the sergeant next time in another episode about how they're not just a value to DWR, but a lot of mutual assistance to other agencies as well. So can you tell us a little bit about maybe the partnership that we have with the Ward Burton Foundation?
Yeah, the Ward Burton Foundation has really helped us out. When you donate money to that foundation, all that money comes to the canine program, and that money is not used anywhere else. And so we use those funds for emergency vet care, for purchase of food, or when we're initially adding dogs, that's when we start acquiring our biggest costs, because you got to purchase the dog. And when we're selecting dogs, we're very picky about dogs. We want the right breed, we want the right health, we want the right drives in the dog. So it takes a little bit, and that costs money. And then it costs money to put kennels into vehicles and heat alarm systems so the dog is safe inside the vehicle on hot days. So all that initial cost, and then all the harnesses and leads and bowls and those things. So the initial cost, usually we pull that out of those funds. That gets us our dogs. So that's the biggest initial cost, and then year to year, it's in between $1,200 to $1,500 a year after that.
Yeah, we're hiring elite athletes.
You've got to have the right dog for the job.
You're going to talk about 2 cases today, and speaking of athlete, you did both of those cases in the same day.
Yeah. One was in Bedford and one was in Nottoway.
Start me off from the beginning. How do you get a call? What is the call, and what's the plan from there?
Yeah, so on this particular day, and really we go to a lot of cases with the dog. These 2 cases highlight different uses of the dog. So with these particular cases, the officer in Bedford had called me. I was off on that day. They called me and said, hey, I've got a landowner that said they heard multiple shots behind their residence. He had got on scene, but prior to him getting on scene, the sheriff's department had showed up, talked to the landowner. They had walked down where they thought the shots were and found a tree stand on their property, so they took that tree stand down. And then they had walked out, and the deputies had left, and the landowner had left. So the officer gets there, and he walks behind the house, and he found a blind that had bait in front of it. So he's thinking that's where they should be. And then he did a really good job as he GPS'd his route in and out.
Nice.
Because he had worked with a dog before, and he knows that my dog can run a track. Well, just because you've walked there doesn't mean that the suspect didn't walk there. So I need to know exactly where people. So he did a really good job of doing that. Once he got in contact with the landowner and said, no, the shots came down farther behind a pond in the area that they took the big tree stand down, this big double stand. So that's when I got on scene, that's where I focused my efforts. So a lot of questions were asked, who all walked there? Where did they walk? What time was it? So I'm calculating in my mind how old my track is going to be, how big my search area is going to be, what do I need to, how wide do I need to go to where I'm not picking up someone else's track. So that's what I'm going through in my mind as the handler. And then once I got on scene, the officer and I walked in, and I deployed my current canine Sky, off lead on an article search, and just had to run the area because I knew that area was going to be highly contaminated from the officers being there and the landowner being there. So I'm just looking for a shell casing, anything like that. And this was a muzzleloader season, but they heard 3 shots pretty close together. So I worked her in that area, and while she was working, I saw her go into a tracking profile. So again, we're watching the dog's behavior, and it starts going around the side of a hill, deeper into the woods. So when I say a tracking profile, that means her nose is low, her mouth is shut, her ears are tight, and her tail is straight. And so she starts working a track line. And so I just told him, I said, let's follow this out. So we follow that track line off lead and just follow her all the way around. And that track ends up going back onto the neighboring property where the baited blind was at. So I do a quick search around the track, around the baited blind, and she started taking another track line away from the blind. So at that point, I decided to transition from an article search and just put her into a tracking harness. Because when she's article searching, you'll see her track maybe 20 yards, and then she'll do a big circle, and then she'll track a little farther and do a big circle, and then track a little farther. Well, once I put the harness on and I give her a command, that's going to tell her to solely focus on tracking. Just track it out. So I put a harness on her, told her to track, and she went probably 70 yards off the blind down a hill a little bit, and then she threw a negative, meaning she came out of profile. So I circled her and she tracked back towards the blind and then made a left-hand turn and went through the woods and got to an old roadbed. From there, we tracked up an old roadbed and out to a driveway and out to a gravel road. And at this point, we're at the landowner's house, but the track continues down a long driveway. That's when the officers, I said, let's hold up and talk to this landowner and see who was hunting here this morning. Talked to him, and he identified that 2 people had been in there, and they had walked over. They didn't drive over. They had walked over from the neighboring house the direction we were headed. I then told the officers, hey, I want to go back and see if I can recover a shell casing, that 70-yard dead end. Usually people don't walk straight out and just walk back for no reason. Yeah. They do something. So I brought Sky back and worked that dead end out, and she goes down and she sits on a log. And I was fully expecting, well, there's going to be the shell casings or whatever. So I go down and look, and I don't see anything. So I just told her back to work. Well, then she stuck her nose up in a knot of a log and then started pulling leaves out with her paw and sat. So I looked up inside there and I could see a butt of a rifle.
Oh, the full thing?
Yeah. So they had a .270 rifle shoved up in that log.
She told you.
Yeah. So the first time she went down there and she threw the negative, I was like, you don't walk down here for nothing. Either they walked down here and shot and walked back, but I was fully expecting to find a shell casing. I wasn't expecting to see a rifle inside the log. But that happens quite often when we're running our dogs. You're expecting to see one thing, and then the dog shows you something, and you're like, ooh, I'd have missed that. Yeah.
So, just another reason to have one of these dogs on the team.
Yeah. And again, that's one of those things is, I was able to search that area out, and these dogs will show a different behavior when they're in blood. Even though we don't train them on the blood, because they're a dog, they really show interest in that. So you're watching the way the nose, the breathing patterns, and the wag of the tail when they get excited in there. And so we made a big circle just to make sure nothing was killed or left behind in the woods. And so she didn't indicate on any of those. So it's able to help us quite a bit figure out what happened.
Now, about how long did that whole scenario take for you?
Probably 35, 40 minutes maybe.
And you covered a good amount of ground.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we cover ground pretty quick. Because we only have to focus where the odor's at. As an officer, I've got to walk back and forth and look around. The dog only focuses on the odor. So if you walk there, that's where the dog's going to focus the search. And that's why it was important that initial officer on scene is he documented exactly where he walked in and what he found and walked straight back out. So I can if she starts working that odor, I'll just work to the right or left of it or to where it ends and see if she continues. If she doesn't continue, then we know that she was on him. But if she continues, we know that now that she's on them. Does that make sense? So yeah. I'm watching that behavior. And so where all the odor was at, where the deputy, the landowner took the tree stand down, she showed a lot of interest in that tree stand. She showed a lot of interest all around it. But then once nothing was found there, she started running a track line. She said, okay, that spot's clear. I'm going this way. And so that's where I'm paying attention to that behavior.
You mentioned Sky, and it's obvious that in your descriptions of all of her behaviors and how she changes, you and her are connected. We haven't really talked about her. She's your dog. How long have you been working with Sky? And tell us a little bit about her.
So Sky's a black lab. She's 8.5, I guess. She'll be 9 this coming September. And so I got her when she was around 9 months old. Oh. So had her for a while.
So full life together. Speaking of which, though, at some point, all the dogs retire. Will Sky be staying with you afterwards?
We leave it up to each handler, so they have the option to purchase a dog from the state after the dog retires. And so I plan on purchasing her, and she'll be a home dog. I tell you, she's not the best at-home dog. She's a great working dog. I wouldn't have picked her for an at-home dog. But we pick these dogs for a specific reason. So.
Yep. They've got to have that drive, that want to work, and sometimes that's not always compatible with laying on the sofa and watching TV.
Yeah, that doesn't work.
That doesn't work.
So.
All right, so that was just your first case for the day. Now where are you headed to?
So then I got a call from an officer in Nottoway and said that they had an individual that had arrived on some property, and this individual was known to have some mental issues, had, I believe, a protective order out on him and some warrants on him. And so they were restricted to having a firearm. And they showed up with another individual at a residence that they recognized him, and the person at that residence didn't answer the door because they're not supposed to be there or have contact with them. So they just let them go do their thing, and they ended up calling the sheriff's department. The sheriff's department and one of our officers arrived on scene, and as they pulled up to a vehicle, they saw one individual disappear into the woods. And a short time later, one of the individuals came back out on their own and said, look, I haven't known this individual, the other suspect, very long, but he told me to run. We ran, and he hit a couple firearms, and he continued to run after he hit his firearms. So these officers, again, they did a really good job of not walking around or trying to go locate the firearms themselves, because that's just going to create more odor for my dog, and I'm going to have to work out every track line or watch her track out as she's doing an article search, because I've got to rule them out. Because I can't ask the dog,
which person was it?
Which person is it? Stay on the right person. Especially in article searching and tracking, we can cut a track and stay on the correct one, but in article search, she's just trying to run each one out. And like I said, she goes out, circles it, and then goes out and keeps circling. She runs patterns right and left, and I can send her out farther, bring her back, or have her check under things. So we worked down a ATV trail, and then down a gas pipeline, and then into a wooded area, and she was able to locate 2 firearms that were buried under a bunch of pine needles.
Obviously, it was a felon who wasn't supposed to have a firearm. Was there any other crime associated with this?
So he was on a protective order, and then he was a felon with a firearm, and I think he had some warrants out in some other areas. And so, after we found the firearms and watching the dog, we had a direction of travel. So the officers were able to send some officers. We kind of had an idea where he would be, what direction, and we had phone contact with him a couple times. He said he got a ride out of town and he was clear somewhere else, but there's no way you'd make it that far in that amount of time, even if you were driving. So the officers were able to set up a perimeter. One of the officers saw the individual hiding behind a church, and we were able to pick him up. When you're working the dog and you have an individual that already seems to have some mental health issues and protective orders and warrants, and you're going in to search for these firearms, you want to get those firearms pretty quick, because they have an opportunity to come back and get them and use them. So our goal is to work that track line out, get the firearms out, and then start going after him. We wanted to secure those to where he wouldn't have access back to them. Yeah.
So now Sky has worked 2 cases. She's done amazing work. What does she get out of it? Is it a treat? Is it a toy? What do you do when it's a job well done?
When she found the first firearm, as soon as she found that and I could verify that she was on an item, then I'm going to pay her. And the way she gets paid is with a Kong with a rope. So she loves to retrieve and she loves to tug. So I'm going to go with a very high pitched voice. We call it the Mickey Mouse voice. We're very high pitched. We're very excited. We're putting every bit of our energy into that dog to tell them that they did a good job. And then we're just going to play tug with them. We're going to retrieve with them. It's whatever that dog wants. So clear back in initial training, we find out what is the jackpot, what is the highest paid reward that that dog wants. So whether it's a food reward, we'll do testing on each dog to find out what is their top choice of which food. Whatever it is, that's what that dog gets when it does a good job. Then we also do toy selection. So the dog determines which toy it likes, whether it's a tennis ball, whether it's a Kong, tug toys. So that is all set up in training at the very beginning when we're selecting dogs. And then when we're out working, that's what that dog gets. If the dog is doing multiple things in a row, say there's 5 or 6 items I need the dog to find, they might get their secondary toy that they think it's okay, but it's not the best. But they know that jackpot, the highest reward is out there. And if they work hard enough, they're going to make it to it. So I might pay them a little bit of food on the first 3 or 4 because it's not as distracting as the toy. And maybe on the 5th one, throw out the toy. So that it's a variable reward system is what we're working with.
So all positive reinforcement,
Everything's
good
positive
fun day in the field.
Yeah, we really focus on the dog's positive reinforcement. We do a lot of marker training, so there's marked commands. So like when my dog finds something and she's sitting on it, I can walk to her and pay her, or I can release her and have her come to me. So if she's way up in the briars and sitting and I can look up in there, then I'm just going to say the word yes. When I say yes, she's coming to me and she's getting paid. Yes means you did the correct job and come and get paid. And so we train these dogs through marker training. It starts out with clickers and then it goes on to voice commands to mark the behavior that we want.
So earlier you mentioned, obviously we touched on a little bit with the article search, track search. You mentioned changing out Sky. You put a harness on when she went into a tracking stance. Tell me a little bit about the difference in training those two different search types, for lack of a better word. And tell me a little bit about the different harnesses and collars that you guys use.
Yeah, so the dog has a regular collar that it normally wears every day. That means you're just wearing it, you're just being a regular dog. And at first the dogs don't associate it with it, but again, that dog is watching our behavior. That dog's around like 24 hours a day. So if I get out and I open the truck door and I don't pick up any collars, any leads, and I say, hey, go break, the dog's gonna go use the bathroom. It knows it's not doing a job. But as soon as I grab one of those collars or those leads, you see the behavior completely change. It's the same thing when I go to a call, I have to turn off my GPS because if it says you have arrived, my dog will start whining and barking because the only time she hears that is when I'm going to a new spot I haven't been before. Uh-huh. And she's associated that with, I'm about to work.
Yeah.
So they mark these behaviors. And so that's what we do is when I first start the dog out introducing a track, then I'm going to take the regular collar off. I'm going to put a tracking harness on. So it's a full body harness. And then I'm going to give a command. Okay. So that's the full steps. I'm setting the dog up and we do that same routine over and over and over again. And as soon as that dog goes forwards and starts sniffing the ground, we praise the dog. So now we're praising the dog for sniffing for odor. And then when the dog shows interest in odor, where we've laid a track out, we really praise the dog. And every time its nose touches the ground and works the track line, we're praising that dog. And so that dog starts learning that behavior that when it sees a long lead with a harness and it comes into a position to put the harness on, it already knows what its task is going to be. You can see, like my dog, when I go to put that harness on, when I get that out, she's literally just shaking. Her legs are quivering, her shoulders are shaking. She starts whining and whimpering. You only see that behavior right when I'm putting the harness on because she knows what she's about to do, okay? And she's anticipating that reward at the end, that jackpot reward, all right? And then in article search, when we're doing that, we take the regular collar off. We have a snap collar, so it makes a clicking sound. As soon as it goes on, it clicks, and then we give a verbal command. So again, that's setting the dog up that sees the different collar, it hears it clicks, it hears a different voice command, and you'll see that dog instantly start working out in front of us, running a different pattern than what it did when it was tracking. It'll start circling in front of you. It'll have its nose to the ground. That's the transition. It doesn't take long for the dog to catch on to that. And again, you can see it in your own, anybody that has a pet can see that their dog, when they do a certain behavior, it causes the dog to do a certain behavior. So that's what we're setting up.
So you're just building off of that to create this high-powered athlete that solves crimes all day long.
It goes all the way back to that breed selection and dog selection, that they want to hunt. They want to please the handler. They've already got those drives built into them, so I don't have to train those drives. I just have to shape the behavior. I got to say, okay, instead of retrieving a duck, I need you to go sit on a gun. Okay, instead of tracking an animal, I need you to track a human. They've already displayed that they can do those behaviors. I just tell them when I want them to do them and how I want them to do them. That's it. So it's not said. It starts clear from the beginning with the right dog, right breed, right drives, and then the play drive and willing to please a handler. And that's all I do is shape that.
Training our elite canine team to make sure that we're out there in the field, efficient, getting the job done.
Yeah.
And having a good time at the same time.
Oh, it's fun. I tell you, running the dog is a lot of fun. I've been doing it for a long time, but it is a lot of fun. It can be extremely frustrating. A dog's a dog. They can sometimes just look at you like, "What are we doing?" You're like, "Hey, I mean," but then they'll turn around and surprise you. They will show you stuff that you've never seen. So when I look back from the time I didn't have a canine, and I look back at cases, I'm like, man, what did I miss? What did I not find?
Yeah.
I mean, from the smallest specks of blood to, the tiniest little bit of blood where animals were shot, to all kinds of evidence left in the woods by hunters or trespassers, and then also cases for sheriff's departments and state police and other agencies that we work with, finding evidence for them.
Now, we've talked about how rewarding it is for the dog at the end of the day. When they've done a good job, they get that massive jackpot reward. Tell me a little bit about how rewarding it is for the handler. Like, obviously, we can tell that you have a passion for it. You love it. You love your dog that you work with. How rewarding is it for a handler? And what do you look for in a handler? I can't imagine that every CPO that applies and says, I want to run a canine, necessarily gets the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, with the handler, we're doing handler selection. It's very important that we get a handler that understands what a CPO does, what a conservation police officer does, how we're going to work. And then also they got to be extremely patient, that you're going to work with a dog that's going to, do 100 reps on the same thing. And you can't get frustrated with the dog. You can't be mad at the dog. Even if you're mad and you're like, I don't know what's going on, you can't show that to the dog. I don't want anybody that's aggressive to the dog or mean to a dog, that they're extremely patient, and then they've got to think through the case. You got to ask the right questions, just like the cases I went over. I asked the officers very specific questions. Where did you walk? What did you do? And then that determines what I need to do. If I just open the door and put it all on the dog, the chances of success go way down. So I need a handler that thinks, that asks really good questions, can think through a problem. It doesn't get stuck on what the interview, what they're telling you need to do, or what they want you to find, or where someone supposedly walked. They focus on that dog, and they read their dog. So I need that kind of driven person. And this is 24 hours. These dogs are with us 24 hours a day, so it doesn't matter if you're on work or off work, you've got to maintain that dog every day. You've got to take care of kennels, you've got to feed, whether it's a holiday. So it becomes part of the family. So it's not just the handlers, it's their spouses, it's their kids. There's a lot to take care of with this dog.
It's a full commitment.
It's a big commitment. And it's not one of those things that where you say, well, let me try it for 6 months see if I like it, or let me try it for a year. Our goal is to have someone to get with a dog, and stay with the dog until it retires.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. We're going to come back and speak with you again on another episode and talk a little bit more about how these canines don't just work for us. They kind of work for everybody, which is really nice here in the Commonwealth. So thanks again for being with us. Thank you guys for watching. And like I said earlier, if you want more information on our canine program, you can go to the link in the description. The link should also be on the screen. So dwr.virginia.gov/canine. If you're feeling generous, there'll be a donate link there so you can donate to the Ward Burton Foundation for the upkeep of our elite canines. Again, we thank you so much, and make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss when we talk about our canines again. Thanks so much and have a great day.
Poachers.